Welcome to r/slash Let's Not Meet. And on today's special Halloween episode, we have horrifying real-life encounters from Reddit users. I'm a girl. My mom was a horrible addict. She barely took care of me as a kid. At the time of this incident, I was around 6 or 7, so my awareness and understanding of things happening may not totally make much sense. This happened in the 90s. One night, my mother and I were on a car ride. I wasn't sure why we were driving, but it was late at night. I'm not sure what time it was, but I assume it was really late because there weren't many cars on the street and I was sleeping in the back seat. I don't even remember getting in the car. My mom drove up to some sketchy house and left me in the car for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open and someone violently grabbed me by the arm and yanked me out of the car. I started screaming and crying until the man that grabbed me looked in my eyes and said, "Be quiet and don't try to run or I'll kill you." He had a scruffy beard and looked like a madman. I was scared to death, so I listened. He held me tight by my arm, shut the car door, and walked with me down the street. I looked back at the house my mom was in, hoping that my mom would come out the last second and save me. I looked at the house as long as I could as the man dragged me further and further away. As we walked down the street, I wanted to cry, but I was in shock and in fear. I didn't know what to do. If I sniffled or cried, the man would tighten his grip and yell at me. I can't even explain how scared and confused I was. We walked for a little bit and ended up in the projects. The projects were a bunch of buildings crammed together in a sucky neighborhood. We walked into one of the buildings and walked up a flight of stairs. My legs and feet hurt like crazy, but I was too scared to stop moving or complain. We walked up another flight of stairs when I saw some random guy smoking a cigarette in the stairway. Then, without warning, the guy that kidnapped me fell to the ground. It happened so fast. I didn't know how the kidnapper fell to the ground so fast, but the next thing I remember is the cigarette guy punching and kicking the kidnapper in his head and face. The kidnapper was out cold. Cigarette guy picked up the kidnapper by the back of his jacket and threw him down the stairs. You have no idea how scary and violent it is to see an unconscious man fall down the stairs. To this day, I still have a fear of falling downstairs. He bled everywhere. I still have no idea how cigarette guy knew to help me, but I'm glad he did. Maybe he could see tears in my eyes. Maybe he just picked up on something and had a bad vibe, but he acted instantly. The first second he could, he attacked my would-be kidnapper. Cigarette guy starts pacing back and forth, swearing at himself, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists. I thought he was mad at me, so I started to cry. He looked at me and said, Okay, shut up. He had an attitude, so I listened to him out of fear. I wasn't as scared of cigarette guy as much as the bearded guy, but I was still in fear of him. He started to ask me questions with an attitude. Why are you out this late? Where are your parents? Why would you talk to strangers? I was in so much shock and confusion, I couldn't answer the man's questions correctly. He asked if I knew my way home, and I told him I didn't. I told him a broken story about what happened, and somehow, with the information I gave him, he knew where my mom's car was. The only thing I remember about the road is passing a house with Christmas lights on it, despite Christmas already being over. I think he knew the area well enough and figured out where I needed to go from that information, but I honestly don't even remember telling him about the Christmas lights. Anyways, he told me he would take me back if I promised over and over that I wouldn't tell the police that I saw him, or anyone that looked like him, and made me promise that I wouldn't even tell the police anything. He had an attitude. I didn't care what he asked me, I just wanted to go back to my mom, so I agreed. I followed him down the stairs. The bearded guy was still laying on the ground bleeding at the bottom of the stairs that cigarette guy threw him down. He wasn't moving at all. For all I know, he was dead, and I hope now that he was. Cigarette guy stepped over the bearded guy and I followed. We walked outside and cigarette guy looked around panicky. I remember him telling me, "The police don't like me." We walked out of the projects and my feet still hurt. Cigarette Guy was walking fast in a panic, and I had to basically jog to keep up with him. I started crying, and he asked what was wrong. I told him my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and picking me up with an attitude. He awkwardly cradled me in both arms. He walked down the road for a moment. Then, I remember him swearing and running behind a house or a building. A cop car was driving down the road. He put me down and told me to run to the police car. I tried to run, but my legs could barely move and I was scared. The cop car kept driving and rode away without seeing me before I could even remotely get close to it. He kept swearing to himself as he picked me up again and ran down the street. He took me behind a lot of houses and hid from every cop car that drove by. I assume now that the police were looking for me. He carried me in both arms, running fast down the road when I saw my mom at her car in the distance. She was surrounded by police. Cigarette Guy put me down and told me to run to the police. I got so excited, the pain in my legs disappeared. He put me down and ran away. I ran towards the police and my mom. My mom picked me up and hugged me tight. The police started to ask me and my mom questions. I don't remember too much about their questions, but I remember my mom telling the police some convoluted story that just didn't make any sense. She basically told me not to say anything, and I didn't say much but cried a whole bunch. We went home. Days later, my dad picked me up and knew something was wrong. I told him everything. I never lived with my mom again. When I grew up and had time to think about that day, I never forgave my mother. Not too long ago, I asked my dad what he remembers about the situation, and he told me what he thinks happened from what I explained to him from years ago. He said my mom was on a drug binge. I got kidnapped. Someone saved me, but the person that saved me had warrants and wasn't mad at me. He was just frustrated with the situation that he had to deal with. Imagine being a criminal on the run, and now you have a kidnapped girl with you, and you just beat a guy up half to death. If he would have gotten caught with me, he could be in jail for my kidnapping. With my mom lying and me being in shock and confused, I wouldn't be able to tell them that the man helped me because while it was happening, I didn't even notice he was helping me. To the man that saved me, thanks. To the man that tried to kidnap me, let's not meet. And then OP adds this in the comments. My father said the kidnapper very well could be dead. If he would have been killed in the projects, the police wouldn't have even investigated. Open and closed case. No witnesses, no cooperation. My father said there would have been more cooperation killing and disposing of the kidnapper than there was to assist the police in the investigation in that area at that time. Also, I was thinking maybe Cigarette Guy knew something was wrong because OP and the kidnapper were different races, so it looked unusual, but OP clarified that she and the kidnapper were both white, and Cigarette Guy was black. Can you imagine being a black guy carrying around a scared little white girl while presumably there's blood on your knuckles and a warrant out for your arrest, but you're still such a good person that you're willing to risk all of that to save this little girl? Not all heroes wear capes, some smoke cigarettes. Our next Reddit post is from I Am Just You. Back in about 2000 or 2001, I was driving by myself from visiting my mom in Colorado back to Arizona. I was in a station wagon and had a desk my mom had given me that was my grandfather's. I've always been scared driving at night that there's someone in my back seat that's going to get me. This might be because of too many scary movies or because my mom's paranoia rubbed off on me. I was in the army and drove back and forth a lot to visit her. She would get mad at me for sleeping at rest stops or gas stations and tell me someone was going to kidnap me and kill me. But I just didn't want to be bothered with the hassle and the expense of a motel most of the time. I digress. So I'm driving an empty stretch of highway late at night with no other cars around. This red truck comes up behind me, flashing his light and honking his horn at me. I was thinking to myself that there was something wrong with my car, or maybe there was something wrong with the desk in the hatchback. Because why else would he be so insistent on pulling me over? So I pull over. I was in my mid-20s and still a bit naive, and get out of my car. As I'm getting out of my car, he's directly behind me and still flashing his lights and honking his horn. I got to about the middle of the car. I planned on going to the back to see what could have been wrong with my car when it hit me. Why is he still honking at me when I'm out of my car? That's odd. Then he gets out of his truck. That's when I knew something just wasn't right. I jumped back in my car and sped off. The next exit was 45 miles or so away. He followed me the entire time. I take the first exit and go to a crowded grocery store with a laundromat next to it. There was an ambulance parked at the laundromat with its lights flashing, and I was next to it. I figured if there was an ambulance, then eventually a police officer should come. The man stayed in his truck in the grocery store parking lot watching me the entire time. I was terrified. I didn't want to get out of my car and felt like an idiot if I would have had to tell someone what happened. I waited about an hour and he finally left. After he left, I waited a little longer before continuing my drive back to Arizona. I was paranoid and watchful for any red trucks the entire time. Fast forward about 5 or 6 years. I'm watching Unsolved Mysteries or some similar type crime show with my hubby at the time. He knew what happened as we were dating when it happened. And what story pops up? One about a man on the exact stretch of highway with a red truck that used those exact tactics to get a few women to pull over and murdered them. I really am glad my gut told me something was wrong and to get back in my car and drive. Our next Reddit post is from Ban Luil. So, a little background here. My father was in the army for 21 years, retired, and moved to a very small town in Central Florida. He got bored after a couple of years, and even though we didn't need the money between his retirement and what my mom was making as a bookkeeper/tax prep, he wanted to go back to work. He started working at various gas stations, and it being a small town, the owners wouldn't care if I came there and helped him out with stocking the coolers or even running the register, as long as I didn't sell any beer or smokes. This all took place in the late 80s and early 90s. The actual story I'm going to tell took place in 1990, and I remember the date well. Because it was shortly after my birthday, and being 15 in Florida, I had just gotten my learner's permit, and my dad would let me drive him to and from work just to get some experience on the road both at day and at night. I was sitting in my usual spot at a table that was set up along the windows, book in hand, feet propped up, and a Mountain Dew on the table along with some snacks. I would generally spend most of the evening that way, reading books, getting up to run the register/stock the cooler at different times. I remember glancing up because something caught my attention that was unusual, and I realized that a lady was walking up our parking lot from the direction of the interstate. The gas station was right on I-75. This in itself was really strange, because where we were located, you didn't get many people walking, and definitely not walking from the direction of the interstate. I figured she'd broken down somewhere and was coming to use the phone to call for a tow truck or something. I was completely wrong. She came into the store, looked around for a few minutes, and I remember getting just a strange and creepy feeling about her. She walked up to the counter and started telling my dad a story about how she had gotten stranded and needed a ride to the next big town up north from us. Ocala was the town. This is important. My dad lets her know that he's working and there's no way he can take her. She turns and looks at me, and while she's looking away from him, my dad catches my eye and subtly shakes his head no. I was confused for a second, but then she turns back to my dad and points at me, asking if I can take her. My dad responded back that I only had a learner's permit and wouldn't be able to drive her anywhere and then drive back. Normally, I would have done it, even though it was illegal, because I'd done it a few times before already. I didn't argue with my dad since this was completely out of character for him. He was normally chatty with the customers, but for whatever reason, he was almost curt and dismissive of her. Turns out, he had a bad vibe about her from the minute he had seen her walking up the drive. Well, she cusses him out for a minute, and he basically tells her to get out of the store. She slammed the door open. I thought the glass was going to break from how hard she had slammed it, and then she stalks out of the store and down the driveway. I keep an eye on her and continue to watch as she makes her way back up to the interstate and then starts up the northbound on-ramp. Almost a year passes, and I'm in my bedroom, less than a week before my 16th birthday. I hear my dad yelling from the living room, "Son, get your butt in here and look at this!" I quickly run to the living room and see my dad pointing at the TV and look at the mugshot of the lady up on the screen, and immediately remember the lady who had been in the store. Turns out, I almost gave a car ride to Eileen Warnos, who was later convicted of being a serial murderer and then later put to death. Still have nightmares about what could have happened. So I had to look this Eileen lady up, and apparently she's a diagnosed psychopath who murdered 7 different men in the 1990s. So considering that OP in this story is a male, he actually fits her victim profile. Apparently, she would strip the guys down naked and shoot them and leave them dead on the side of the road. So if OP had given her a ride, it was probably the last time he would have ever driven a car. That was rSlash Let's Not Meet, and the only thing more horrifying than these stories is you not hitting that like button.